Games rated E to M. Welcome to Nintendo Power Podcast. This episode, we look back on 35 years of The Legend of Zelda with our favorite games and memories from the series. My name is Chris, and this episode I'm joined by two members of Nintendo Treehouse. Ethan, hi Ethan, welcome back.
Hey, Chris. Good to be back.
And Audrey, hi Audrey, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Chris. So nice to be here.
Now, this marks the 35th anniversary year of a series that I know is very near and dear to all our hearts, The Legend of Zelda. And since we're almost out of episodes for the year, I really wanted to take this chance to recognize the anniversary by talking all about the series today. And I couldn't have asked for two bigger Legend of Zelda fans to talk to about the Triforce Ocarinas and everything in between. So are you two ready to kick things off?
Let's do it.
Always.
Yeah.
Awesome, great. Well, I'm going to start things off with a bang and put you both on the spot and ask you to each list your personal top three all-time favorite Legend of Zelda games.
Oh my.
And you'll start with number three, your number three game. Talk a little about why you chose it, then move on to number two, and finally finish with your top pick. So, Ethan, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah, I can go first. I'll start by saying this is a tricky exercise for somebody like me because I kind of feel I've never been somebody with movies, really, or like books where I have like an absolute favorite. It kind of changes a lot, and I feel that way about the Legend of Zelda series as well. Kind of day of the week or what mood I'm in might dictate, what game I think is a favorite of mine. But three I picked that I was kind of giving some thought to, and three I picked this time. I'll start with number three was The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds for the Nintendo 3DS, and I loved that game. Took me by surprise. I worked in the localization team in the Treehouse. I didn't work on that game, so sometimes when we work on games like that, you kind of see everything, And I was actually happy I hadn't worked on that one as much as I wanted to, because when I played it, it was completely fresh for me. And I think, as we probably all did, grew up with games like Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and loved that with the light world and the dark world. And so I loved getting to kind of see the structure of that brought back in Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, but also like additions and interesting takes on the classic Legend of Zelda formula, like the ability to rent items from Ravio. So you could get access to some pretty key items early on in the game, whereas we'd been trained to like beat a dungeon, get a particular item, use it to defeat bosses. So I loved that new take and that kind of continuation of the story of Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Number two for me would probably be the Legend of Zelda, the Wind Waker HD. And the reason I specify the HD version, I loved the game on the GameCube. But right around the time that the HD version came out, my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and she, it's definitely something that we're used to now, but at the time she was 6, and it was a lot to handle with, needing to check her blood sugar, and so it was going into the holidays, and up here in Seattle area, it gets kind of dark and cold and wet, and so that game had just come out, and my daughter was not familiar with the Legend of Zelda series yet, and having to deal with this, this new kind of unpleasant experience. And as you guys are aware, the graphical styling of the world of Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker is so inviting and warm and recognizable to children who are familiar with cartoons and things like that. And we played through that game together. I played the game with advice from her, and she absolutely loved it. And today she is now 13 and beat the Legend of Zelda: The Breath of the Wild all on her own, and is a stalwart Legend of Zelda series fan. So that one's particularly close to my heart. But I have to save the number one spot for the original The Legend of Zelda on the NES. And that's just because it was my introduction to the series, and I still go back and play it every once in a while. I love how you're really not given much in the way of instruction, partly because of the technology at the time. They didn't have a lot of space in the game to give you a tutorial. And it's really left up to the player to figure out this world of mystery and secrets and go explore dungeons and fight monsters and recover treasures in your search for the Triforce. And I just find it so iconic and have a lot of nostalgia for it. So that's got the number one spot for me.
That's an amazing list, and one of the cool things about it is it didn't include any of the games that are on my list, but I love every one of those games that you mentioned. It just shows you how many amazing games there are in the series,
Hmm.
and that's a great point. To be honest, I had it had slipped my mind a little bit about The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker HD. I really loved that version, how they sped up the sailing a little bit
Yep.
and added some other new enhancements. I really loved how the Wii U gamepad was used.
Hmm.
And it just took and I think that game actually, the original Nintendo GameCube version, has held up very well, in particular
Hmm.
because of that graphical
Hmm.
style. But it just took it to a whole other level. And wow, that's a great story. It also reminds me, just very briefly, of how it was The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap on Game Boy Advance that I was actually playing in the delivery room before
Oh,
my
Oh,
son
wow.
was born while my wife was resting, and
Hmm.
I was too amped up to rest, so I played the game. I think I actually finished it there. But yeah, there's a lot of great stories, and we've got some from the fans we're going to get into later
Oh,
as well
awesome.
about families kind of coming together around these
Hmm.
games.
aw.
All right, so Audrey, what about your top three?
All right. So, first of all, great list, Ethan. And somehow ours don't overlap either, which again is just a testament to how many incredible games there are in the Legend of Zelda series. So, I will say that one and two on my list are a bit controversial. You'll see why when we get there. But this is a long standing list. It hasn't really changed much. I stand by it with every fiber of my being. So, number three for me is actually The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. I love that game. It's so bright and so fun. I adore the Minish. I love all of the lore that they added to the world. Eslo is one of my favorite sidekicks. I love Eslo
Yes.
so much. I love the relationship between Link and Zelda in that game. The way that they were kind of childhood friends and got to be kids together. You don't often get to see that between them. So I just loved having a game where we got to have that. And the items, like the moments, I love the moments. I would like real life moments. And the shrinking mechanic was just so fresh, and I just adore that game. So good choice for your son's birthday to play on that day. My number two choice is Majora's Awakening. It's I won't choose between them. It's The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask and The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. I won't choose. You can't make me choose. Both of those games are each so impactful. The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask, especially the 3D version, which I had the great honor of working on. It's just such a dark but beautiful story. I love the loneliness of the Skull Kid and the world of Termina. How you kind of get to see all of these people and how their lives unravel over the course of these 3 days. You get to see, in a way, how they face their own mortality. It's just such a deep story. It's one of those games that I've kind of grown up with. I appreciate it more the older that I get, and every time I replay it, which is way too often, I just get more and more out of it. So that one's really special to me. And The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening is similar to me. It's just I think about it all the time. Actually, the Windfish and. Well, I don't. I know we're talking all things Zelda, but I kind of don't want to spoil it because it's such a wonderful story and a wonderful surprise. But I'll say that I think it's such a beautiful metaphor and such a beautiful story. So those two combined are my number 2 favorite Zelda game. And
We'll
then my
allow it.
top favorite, yes, and then my top number 1 Zelda game, which again I stand by, is A Link to the Ocarina of the Wild. I'm sorry. I cannot choose. I know I'm a terrible person, but these have always been my choices. It's
love
The
it.
Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and the more recent edition, which made my number 1 choice really crazy, was The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. And in my opinion, I think they each represent the best of a certain era of gaming. To me, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is the best 2D game in the world. It's the best 2D Zelda game, and I just think it's perfect gameplay. I love the lore, I love the gameplay, I love the items, I love the characters, I love everything about it. And it's the same with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It's just it was such a perfect step for Zelda into the world of 3D. And I still remember stepping outside and looking out at Death Mountain and at this huge world before me, and just being astounded that I could actually go and visit all of these places. It really put this sense of adventure and wonder into my heart that I feel every time I revisit that game. It's really special. And the 3D version, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D on Nintendo 3DS, it's kind of just like the 3D version of Majora's Mask. It's kind of amazing because even though they were so beautifully remastered, to me, they just look like I imagined the Nintendo 64 versions looked. I know
Mhm.
that doesn't make sense, but when I see them, I just see what I saw in the Nintendo 64 versions. So in that way, they're such true remasters of those wonderful games. And then, of course, the more recent The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, to me, is the best of modern gaming. In my opinion, it's just. It's so open. There's so much to do, so much to explore. It deepens the lore even further, and yeah, those 3 are my favorite Zelda game.
I actually love what you did there with your list, and I wholeheartedly approve of it for a couple of reasons. Because one, I think Chris has kind of given us a bit of an impossible task. It's like
Uh-huh.
this unsolvable Sophie's choice where you're just like, no, I'm not going to make a decision between these
Yes.
things I all love equally. But also, I liked that with your second games with Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening and Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, that they're both this kind of like exception to the rule, this like
Mm.
weird twisting of the formula that produced these really interesting results. And then with your first 3 that took your first spot, those really show how over the course of the series, like it's reinvented itself or taken itself into a new era of like gaming technology and gaming conventions, but has always remained like unmistakably The Legend of Zelda. And I love that you kind of have some themed groupings there. So approved on my end. I don't know what Chris thinks,
Thanks.
but
I've got Ethan's approval. That's what counts.
Well, it definitely gets a full approval from me. And in fact, I think we might have the exact same Legend of Zelda brain because my top 3 are basically the 3 games from your top spot.
oh wow.
Perfect.
And but I hadn't even. I was wondering why I was settling on these games because really, in any other day, 1 or 2 could be switched out
Sure.
for other games
Oh,
because I'm
yes.
not as set in my list. But I think you really nailed something there when you said that each of these games, when you're talking about The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, and then The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, really were defining moments and kind of periods in the franchise where the rules were kind of rewritten and we got something brand new. Or maybe it's more accurate to say for the Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past that it was very similar to the original Legend of Zelda, but it was such a refinement
Mm-hmm.
that it
Hmm.
really best represents that kind of gameplay.
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So and then, well, I'll just get to it here. I actually, at my number 3, I had The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. And actually, my favorite version of that game is the Nintendo 3DS version.
Mm-hmm.
I like what you said. It looks like you remembered the original game to look, but of course, if you go back and look at the original game now, it's I mean, it's still an amazing game, obviously, but it has aged as
Mm-hmm.
any game will. But I love that the depth of I played all my 3D games with the slider all the way up, right? So
Same.
I love being on the rooftops of Kakariko Village and kind of using the hook shot to get around from one place to the other, and it just felt so great. And then if you think back historically to what that game brought to the series, like we were saying, it was such a pivotal game. It was the first Legend of Zelda game with polygonal 3D graphics. It introduced the lock-on camera to the series, which was huge. I mean, at that time, we were still only a couple of years removed, maybe from when Super Mario 64 kind of arrived and kind of popularized 3D polygonal gaming, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And people were still kind of figuring out, exactly how these mechanics should work for these kinds of experiences we were used to in a 2D space. And that lock-on camera really solved a problem that I wasn't even really aware would have been a problem.
Right.
Hmm.
But once you had it, and of course, it's around in many games today. It was so important. And then you got your two time periods with young Link and older Link, which has been kind of a recurring, theme throughout the series. I think it's the first game you could ride a horse with a Epona, unless I'm
Mm-hmm.
forgetting one.
I think you're
Hmm.
right.
And that was a lot of fun and just a great story. So, I think for a lot of people, this game would probably be at the very top of their list, and I certainly couldn't argue against it. Although I did have as my second favorite, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. It is just probably, and I really love The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. And if it wasn't for nostalgia, I don't know, maybe that one would win out over the Super NES game. But I just remember how big it was at the time. It's aged incredibly well. I kind of rank it alongside Super Mario World and Super Metroid
Yep.
as
Hmm.
those three perfect expressions on Super NES of those types of game, for those franchises. So, um, and it was fun to get back to that original style of Legend of Zelda after Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, had kind of taken the combat in maybe you could say a more traditional
Mm-hmm.
side-scrolling style. And I love that game for what it is, and it's so unique. But it really felt like you were going back home when you went back to The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And then my favorite, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Of course, I played the Nintendo Switch version. It was also on Wii U, but it really went back to the spirit of the original game, where all the rules were kind of thrown out the window, and you
Yep.
weren't quite sure what to expect. So you felt like you had to try everything, and it really brought back this big sense of wonder. I think, especially if you were a big fan who'd played, the Wind Waker, and then the Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess, and
Hmm.
some of the other ones. They're all different and special in their own ways, but after a while you could start to see the patterns. You kind of knew generally what to expect. But when The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild kind of changed everything, it took me back to when I was a kid playing the original Legend of Zelda on NES,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's why I put it at my number one. But man, it was a great discussion. I'm glad we were able to talk about so many different kinds of games.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was really interesting to hear your guys' different picks and all the different reasons that those games are your favorites are. I just think examples of how strong the connections that these games make with people. Chris, hearing you relate that personal story about the birth of your son, like when we have those things in our life that happen and we're playing a game, because of them or just during them, games like this kind of really mark themselves indelibly in our memory. And, it's, I think, a testament to the strength of these games, the songs, the look. We remember where we were, what we were doing in our lives when we played these games. And that makes them really special to me.
It's so true, and I think we're from similar generations. Ethan and I, at least,
Mm-hmm.
that we played The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of the Time. We were still pretty young, and
Mm-hmm.
Chris kind of touched on this, but the way that it tackles kind of. Having a trial and a higher calling thrust you from childhood into adulthood, playing that as a kid is so impactful. Just seeing your hero Link go from the state of kind of blissful innocence, the
Yep.
innocence of youth, and thrown into this deep responsibility of adulthood where he's challenged with facing the evil of the world and even having to confront the darkness within, kind of epitomized by Dark Link emerging from his reflection.
Hmm.
It really touches you on a deep, almost subconscious level, and kind of raises that game and these games from being just great games to these really moving, unforgettable experiences.
Absolutely. And that's the great, thing you can say about every Legend of Zelda game is it's someone's first. And I'm always jealous, or not jealous, but envious of people who get to re-experience all over again today what I experienced, back when I was first getting into the
Hmm.
series. And there's a lot of now that we've kind of established kind of what kind of Legend of Zelda fans I guess we are based on our favorite games. I wanted to talk specifically about all the great Legend of Zelda games that are on Nintendo Switch. And
There are a lot at this point.
there are.
Yeah.
I mean, and as I started typing my notes up for this episode, I realized just how many. I mean, we've got The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD, plus fun offshoots like the Hyrule Warriors games and Cadence of Hyrule Crypt of the Necro Dancer featuring The Legend of Zelda. And then you've got the classic games like the original Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, and The Legend of Zelda Link to the Past, which are part of the NES and Super NES collections, that come with the Nintendo Switch Online membership. And then just recently, as part of the Nintendo 64 collection that comes with the Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack membership, we added the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. So with this one platform,
And we've shown that that Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is coming sometime. So look forward to that as well.
That's right. That's on the way. So, having said all of that, when we're talking about experiencing the series on Nintendo Switch, Audrey, which Legend of Zelda games have you maybe sunk the most time to on your time into on your Nintendo Switch?
Ooh, if we're talking Nintendo Switch, I have given a fair chunk of my life to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is funny because I obviously played a lot of it during development, but during the localization. But when it came out, I was just a Legend of Zelda fan again.
Yep.
I was so eager to play it day one, and I still return to it. There's still so much to do. It's one of those games that I don't think you ever really finish playing. You can always go out and find something else to do, find another Korok or something else to cook, another moblin to defeat, something.
Yeah, I'm the same way. There's still 2 shrines that I haven't located yet. And
Oh.
I think I've been dragging my feet on that because, and one part of my brain is like, come on, we can get all the Koroks. You want to go for it. But the more reasonable part of my brain is saying, well, once you finish those 2 shrines, you're essentially done. And so I think I've been putting it off and maybe waiting for a special occasion. But yeah, that is a game you can just live in, basically.
hmm
That world is so vast. So, Ethan, what about you? What have you spent the most time playing on Nintendo Switch when it comes to the series?
I have put a lot of time into The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which I think is probably not that uncommon for folks who are Legend of Zelda fans on Nintendo Switch. But I've also, like I said, I've kind of sat and watched my daughter, play through that game. That was really her first time playing a Legend of Zelda game on her own, kind of from start to finish. And watching her, start and struggle at the beginning with, using 2 different control sticks to move Link and the camera at the same time, getting very familiar with that has been a really rewarding, experience for me. And I've been really surprised. Like, people talk about, that game is really challenging, kind of like the original Legend of Zelda. Doesn't give you a ton of hand-holding tutorials at the beginning. You kind of are let loose into the world once you get off the Great Plateau. And watching her figure it out, and helping when she needs it, but she took on all the bosses, all the big challenges, and got all the way through the game. That's been really kind of a proud moment for me, as a parent. But for personally, I really loved the Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening on Nintendo Switch. Just rediscovering that world again. I was not someone who played the original game extensively. I played it a bit, but something about it, I didn't finish it when I was a little kid, and being able to just see the lush, vibrant, recreation of this world with all the colors and this very distinct art style that they all had, was something that really drew me in and really made me see it through, all the way to the end this time, and so I really loved my time with that game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really enjoyed The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening too. And that was a game that I didn't play the original game. And I'm sorry to say this, Audrey, but I didn't play the original Game Boy version for
For
quite some time.
shame.
I know I missed it for some reason. And then it became one of those games. I'd play the version on Game Boy Color.
Hmm.
Every few years I would kind of play part of the way through it again, and then for whatever reason put it down. Finally, did get through it, at some point several years ago, and just enjoyed it so much. But because of my history with that game, never, I guess, kind of just going full force through the game from beginning to end without interruptions, I really enjoyed that opportunity to do it with the Nintendo Switch version. It was so charming. I love the graphics in that game. And it can be one of the trickier ones, or at least
Yeah.
it was for me, where you can, there's only one way to get forward, and you haven't quite figured it out yet. And you're kind of recanvassing the map, trying to figure out what you missed. But it's just that much more rewarding once you finally do. And the story is just so sweet. Yeah, I understand now why it's such a fan favorite.
Absolutely. And I think in talking about The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, we would be remiss to not mention the Ballad of the Windfish. I just
Ooh.
have to give a shout out to that song. That song pierces my very soul. It's so beautiful. Something about it captures all of the different feelings and emotions of the journey of that game. So didn't want us to pass by without mentioning that song.
Yeah, and I think it must be said that for the entire series, I think that's one of the things that The Legend of Zelda is well known for, is some really memorable music. And I think everyone has their favorites. I think The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is one that is particularly remembered for how many great tunes are in that. So, and then of course in the more modern versions, the orchestral soundtracks can be so sweeping and epic. That's a whole other way to experience the series, is just to sit there with the music, and that's one of those things. When I'm playing Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, I can just go in and set these have a field day just playing all these different songs in that mode. And while we're talking about, or maybe segueing a little bit from The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, that is one of the games, along with the original Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, that are included in the new classic Game and Watch system, the Game and
Yes.
Watch Legend of Zelda system that just came out recently. Have either of you had a chance to try that out?
Yes, yes. That's one that I was, again, had the great honor of being able to work on, and it is just a beautiful piece of machinery. It's just a joy. It's a treasure for any fan of the Legend of Zelda series. Those three games all in one package, and being able to switch between them, even switch between the languages. It's just so cool. And also having the Legend of Zelda themed version of Vermin. I feel like that's my favorite Game and Watch game. So the fact that that's the one that they chose just feels like a gift from Nintendo.
Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to work on that as well from the product marketing side. And I will call out a short series of 3 articles that folks can look up on Nintendo.com that are all about the many secrets that are packed into that system. So this is an article, you could probably find it by looking up the Legend of Zelda Secrets series, or just Secrets series when you're on Nintendo.com. But there are some hidden button commands that will help you get your way through the game. There are some hidden Easter egg images you can see, and all sorts of little goodies that are tucked into the system, and that I think the development team for this, which was led by Takashi Tezuka, director of the original Legend of Zelda game, they, I think, wanted to pack in secrets and mysteries and things to find and discover, which are kind of a hallmark of the series in my mind. And I love that they packed in all these things. I won't give what all of them away what all of them are, but I would recommend going and checking out those articles.
Ethan, would you say it's a secret to everybody?
Well, it's not now
I'm
because
sorry.
I'm talking about it, but yeah, nice call out.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to look those up myself. I knew, there was some fun interactive things you could do with the digital clock and the timer on the system that were very themed after the original Legend of Zelda. But all right, I'm gonna have to see what these
Yeah,
secrets
all
are.
sorts of differences between the different language versions of those games that you can hear, from the audio to some graphical differences. So folks who are fans will want to check that stuff out, I think.
That's right, because the original Legend of Zelda, and maybe Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, I'm not sure, but I know that I believe it was for the Famicom Disk System in Japan, which allowed for maybe some slightly spiced up audio. So when you do look at those different versions of the game side by side, or especially if you listen to them, you can tell some differences. That'll be fun for fans to discover if they have never experienced that before.
Yep.
And then when it comes to me, I just, I'm a bit older than you guys, and I remember as a kid seeing all those Game and Watch systems at the store, kind of behind a glass case, and I was only ever able to get one of them. I think it was Donkey Kong 2, the Game and Watch, and I always wanted to have them all. So for me, it's just pure '80s nostalgia to grab one of these. Just like when the Super Mario Brothers edition came out, I just, first of all, just want to have it, just to have it and look at it and have it on my desk. But then to be able to just pop in really quickly and play any of those old games again, it's just so fun.
That's so true.
Oh, go ahead, Audrey.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say real quick, when you get either of those new Game & Watch releases, for half a second, you think, I don't even want to take it out of the box. It's so beautiful. I should preserve it. And then you just tear it right out and dive in.
Yeah. The box in and of itself is pretty cool, though, with the little slipcase, the see-through slipcase with the different images on it. And then, before we move on, I just got to say, there's really not much that can be said about this game yet. But of course, like most everyone else who has a Nintendo Switch, I'm so looking forward to next year and finally getting to see the sequel to The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Whenever it's ready, I just can't wait to finally dive back into that kind of experience again and see what new surprises are cooked up. I probably watched the 2 trailers for that game about 100 times by now. I'll probably watch them 100 more times before the game actually comes out.
Yeah, I think all fans of the Legend of Zelda series are anxiously anticipating 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah, I may have to plan a vacation day that day. We'll see, or maybe a vacation week. So we're going to continue talking about the Legend of Zelda series, but we're going to move on to the next segment that we call Player's Pulse. And so a few days ago, we asked Nintendo fans on Twitter a few questions about the Legend of Zelda series, as usual, just for fun. And first off, we asked, who was your favorite champion from the Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild? Before we hear what the fans voted for, Ethan, who was your personal favorite champion? We've got Daruk, Mifa, Rivali, or Urbosa.
I mean, again, it's hard for me to pick favorites. I love Urbosa. She's just so iconic and strong and, I don't know, tall, and she's just so cool. I'm like, I want to grow up to be Urbosa. So yeah, but I do really like them all. I love the different personalities they have and how they kind of are representatives of the different, peoples, that in the different realms of Hyrule. But I think I'll go with Urbosa this time.
Audrey, how about you? Do you have a favorite champion?
Rivali forever. Rivali's my favorite. I love him more than it's reasonable to love him. I just do, especially if you go and find and read his diary from the DLC, the Champions Ballad. It's so, you really get an insight into that feathery head of his. And I don't know, I have a soft spot for characters who kind of put up a front and it seems like everything comes to them so easily, but then you find out that they actually have a bit of a chip on their shoulder and they're actually trying so hard and they care so much more than they let anyone else see. So now that I've seen into Rivali's heart, I know how pure it is and I just love him so much.
Can't believe you read his diary. No, I'm just kidding.
I know. I read every page.
I don't know if I could really pick one, but so what I'm going to do is just go with the fans in this instance who voted for Mifa with 36% of the vote.
Huh.
I thought it was, she was formidable as well, and I thought it was cute, that she was a bit sweet on Link.
Yep.
And yeah, so that's who they voted for on this one. But it was pretty. After that, it was pretty evenly split.
I
So
think a lot of people end up, going to Zoro's domain first. So maybe there's a little bit of that's the first champion you encounter and first love type thing. But yeah, they're
Mifa's
all really
diary is
impressive.
pretty
be, yeah.
special too. Go read everyone's diary. Be a terrible person. And since he wasn't any of our choices, I have to say that Daruk is amazing. He's a close second. I love Champion Daruk. He's so lovable. I feel like we almost all take him for granted, but he's amazing too.
yeah, I could hang out and drink some Lon milk with Daruk.
That's right. Have some rock steak.
All right, the next question was, which system did you play your first Legend of Zelda game on? Was it Super NES or older, Nintendo 64, Nintendo GameCube, or Wii or newer? Anybody want to guess? I mean, of course, this is this isn't a very scientific study. It's the people on that day who were gracious enough to
Sure.
respond to our Twitter poll. But what do you think would be the era that most of these respondents first started the series on?
I don't think I want to know.
I feel like it's gonna be N64, GameCube. Was that a category where those two together?
There were two separate categories,
Okay.
actually, Nintendo 64 and Nintendo GameCube.
I'm gonna guess Nintendo 64. I don't know if that's right, but I just have an inkling about that.
I'm
right.
gonna hop on to that guess as well and say maybe the Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time pulled a bunch of people in.
Well, you're both close. That was the second biggest vote getter at 25%. But actually, Wii or newer was at
Whoa.
39%.
Oh wow!
So yeah,
That makes
that does make
sense.
me feel a little bit
I
old.
wonder because
Yeah, I knew I didn't want to know.
I wonder because the Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild brought so many people into the Legend of Zelda tent. A lot of them, probably for the first time, or at least the first time in a long time. So that may be part of that reason.
Definitely. That makes sense to me. All right, the final question that we asked was simply, can you wait to bomb some Dodongos? And the choices were yes or no. So Audrey, can you wait to bomb some Dodongos?
No.
I mean, they do like smoke. They like smoke, so
They do.
why not? Let's give the Dodongos what they like. Let's bomb them.
You should wait, but you shouldn't.
Yeah, 59% of the respondents could not wait to bomb some Dodongos, which I agree with. I never get tired of feeding them bombs, watching their eyes kind of bulge comically as they realize they're going to have really bad indigestion.
I still have a strong memory of, it was so interesting as somebody who grew up, I think like you guys, playing the original games on, whether it was the NES or the SNES, like seeing, Dodongo was such a kind of an iconic memory or a boss in that first Legend of Zelda game where you couldn't just whack at it with a sword because it's too tough. So you had to feed it bombs. And then seeing how they recreated that in Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time in one of the dungeons where you're doing the same thing, but it's in this very different 3D style of gameplay. But if you're somebody who experienced that first game, you'll totally get the callback and probably know a hint about how to defeat the enemy. So yeah, it was just cool to see how they reimagined it.
It's so true. And I feel like for people who kind of grew up with these games like we did, or even for people who, I know some people who have started their kids on, the original games and are letting them progress through them in their release order, you really get to see the progression of these ideas, how so many things that started in the original game have a through line into even the recent games. It's really, as a fan, it's just such a joy to see that attention to detail and that legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And then, I really like in, I think the first Hyrule Warriors game where you encounter this giant Dodongo and you're just, at that point, you're just chucking bombs into it, like just spamming the bombs in there. So yeah, no matter how you do it, it's always fun to feed some bombs to Dodongo.
True.
So now we're going to move on to Nintendo Power Game Club. In this episode, we're going to dive into the original Legend of Zelda game for NES in honor of the game's 35th anniversary this year. Now, as we've kind of talked about earlier, this is the game that started it all with our first looks at Link, Ganon, Princess Zelda, the Triforce, and lots more. It came in that shiny gold NES game pack originally, in that gold box with a full color instruction book and a fold-out map, which were really rare items back in those days. And it was a totally different kind of game. And I think that's what really, kicked this series off was the fact that compared to all the straightforward action games that were out at that time, where you kind of just went from point A to point B, kind of punching and kicking enemies, The Legend of Zelda was this giant maze. The overworld was a giant maze, which led to lots of other smaller dungeon mazes. The game didn't tell you, where to go or what to do, except for the rare kind of cryptic clue from someone in a cave that you might find. And even the locations of the dungeons were a mystery. You might have to burn down some random tree just to find the entrance. And in an era before the internet or strategy guides, or even before Nintendo Power Magazine was out, you could only really rely on your own wits to solve this game, or whatever tips you might trade with your friends at school. And so it was a strangely kind of social game in that way. So before we start digging in on this game, we did ask the fans on our social channels to share their memories of the game. And I want to read 3 of their comments here. First, we have one from Daniel, who said, my mom got my dad an NES in 1988 for his 30th birthday, and The Legend of Zelda was one of the games purchased alongside it. In 1994, I was 5 years old and finally wanted to give it a shot. It took nearly a year, but Dad and I finished the game together, and that feeling of satisfaction, along with getting lost in the game's world, is what got me into gaming and playing to this day. And then Mike shared, Mike said, I remember playing this game with friends at school. We would be on the phone with each other while we found new secrets and hidden items. Nintendo Power wasn't around yet, so we would make diagrams of the labyrinths and share them with our group. It was so much fun and probably made me get into RPG and strategy games. This game was the first of its kind for us kids because it required us to think and strategize as we moved forward in the game. And then finally, Colby said, I used to play The Legend of Zelda as a kid and I loved every second of it, but I never ended up beating it. Now I'm married and I'm introducing The Legend of Zelda to my wife. When one of us loses, we pass the controller. It's been awesome showing her my childhood games and seeing how much she enjoys them. So I thought those were some great memories and kind of reminded me of a lot of my experiences with the series. Audrey, what was your first experience with the game like?
Yeah, I think what stuck in my mind more than anything was, as you kind of touched on, that open world, non-linear nature of the gameplay. It really just made it feel like this living world and this true personal adventure in a way that I'd never experienced in a game or anything really before. It just it captured the joy of exploration for me. And as a kid, you don't get to exactly run out and go anywhere you want with a sword slaying monsters when you're a kid, or maybe even as an adult. So having that outlet to explore and kind of unravel these mysteries, it really instilled a yearning for mystery in my heart at such a young age, and I loved it. Also, the Tezuka-san's kind of myth-inspired storytelling. I was really young when I played it, but I've appreciated that more as I've gotten older. Just having the whole fate of the world at stake. The kingdom of Hyrule is kind of, when you start the game, it's engulfed in chaos and it's threatened by darkness. And it's only by joining these powerful elements, the courage of the hero, the power of the gods, and the hidden pieces of wisdom that must be recovered, represented by Zelda. And by uniting them, you bring peace and light to the world. Those are just such high stakes and such heavy concepts that they really leave such a deep impact on you, even if you're very young when you first play the game. So that's why I think it's just such a beautiful, timeless story, and it had such an impact on me. It still does when I play it.
Absolutely. Ethan, how about you? And also, when you think back on this game, or maybe when you play it again now, what jumps out at you the most?
I mean, listening to you guys talk about it so far, one of the things that jumps out at me is how much they got right in that first game. And like one of the things Audrey was mentioning was kind of the through lines that you see run through the series that are still in the series today. You know, with games like Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Just the audio cues that you get when you discover something or when you find an important item. And the fact that if you go back to that first game, Link finds an item and holds it up over his head, and he still is doing that to this day. Looking for environmental clues like cracks in walls to open new entrances with your bombs, places to use your items that you've newly acquired. That pattern, that structure of starting kind of with nothing, slowly acquiring powerful tools and items that give you new abilities, and then using those to access new areas is still something. Even though the structure of a game like Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is different and much more vast, with the new technology we have available, a lot of what you're doing, the format is still, holds true, and you can see again that this is undeniably like a Legend of Zelda game. And that's one of the things that I find so impressive, that has stayed consistent throughout the series. But going back to that first game, I just have a strong memory of the mystery around that game. You know, I don't know, and I probably should try and talk to a couple of people who still work here and worked here when that game was first brought to our territory. But in Japan, like you said, Chris, the original Legend of Zelda came out on the Famicom Disk System, and the packaging for those games, if you haven't seen them, is pretty small. There was a floppy disk you had had an instruction manual that was in there, but it wasn't particularly remarkable. And about a year later, when they finally brought the game out here in America, it like you said, arrived in this gold box with this gold cartridge, and it was called The Legend of Zelda. And we all take that name now as just okay, it's completely second nature, but like, what does that mean? There was no explanation. Who is Zelda? Why is there a legend about him, her? Who is this person? And there was so much mystery around that. And why did this game get this special treatment? And come, like you said, Chris, with this pretty hefty full color guide that came with it, and a full map. There seemed, I think, even as kids, we realized like, Nintendo is doing something special with this game, and there's a lot in here, and I think it really was rewarding if you kind of picked up on that to dig in and spend your time with it. It really gave back to you, to those of us that were able to puzzle out all of its secrets. I could go on for a long time, but there's so many little details in that game that I think are funny and great. Like, there you would occasionally wander into a room in a dungeon that had 6 or 7 enemies, and they had this concept of the ringleader enemy, which hasn't really stuck around in the series, but you would occasionally find an enemy, and if you attacked the right one and defeated it, it would defeat all the rest of the enemies in that room. There are other interesting things, like the 2 types of candle that you got, where one, the first candle you could only use once per screen to burn something, and then you'd have to go to the next screen and come back. And then finally you got the candle that you could just use as much as you want. You're just like burning everything in sight. So yeah, lots of memories, lots of little details. But it just is really impressive to me, with all these years in between where we are now and that first game, how much kind of still remains true about that formula, and how much of that first game you can still see in games like Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild.
It's so true. And building on points that you already said, Ethan, the way that game combined this world of mystery with kind of a pretty quirky sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
That combination was so stirring, and it's something that's really lasted into all Zelda games since. And
Mm-hmm.
even back then, back when gaming technology was still pretty much in its infancy, you could see that there. And I think that's another thing that was so memorable about that
Mm-hmm.
game.
You didn't know if you were going
Yeah.
to get a new heart container for breaking open a wall with your bomb, or if somebody was going to charge you a door fee to repair their door,
That's
for,
right.
for breaking in there.
Yeah, I can remember just playing that game late into the night and literally just walking along a cliff face and just bombing every square until you hear that, that discovery chime and you realize you found something. And then you pop
Yep.
in and they just want you to pay them back for the damage you just got.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You've got to do it. You've got to bomb.
yeah. And then the same with burning every bush, especially after you realize that one of them is the entrance to a dungeon, then you go on the warpath. But yeah,
Yep.
that's a game where I can never think about that game without my memory of it being influenced by the feeling of that first experience playing it, and it was so
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And you mentioned that gold packaging; it really worked as a marketing tool, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
because I'd never heard of the game at the time that it came out. I just saw it show up in the store one day. But that gold box with the little die cut window that showed the gold cartridge underneath, I knew it must be
Mm-hmm.
like, this is top class right here. This is Nintendo going all out. So, even without even knowing what the game was, I knew I had to have it. And I would take that instruction manual and the map to school every day, and at lunch I would just kind of pore over it and talk to my friends. And of course, the chatter at school about The Legend of Zelda was, you'd get some bad information and somebody would claim something that wasn't
Yep.
true, so you never knew
Yep.
quite sure what
Yeah.
was going to work until you tried it. But it was, what we've kind of been saying. It was back then. You didn't know what was or wasn't possible. They basically just started the game. You don't even have a sword. You go in the very first cave
Mm-hmm.
you see, and they give you a weapon. And then if you go in the right direction, just a few screens north, and then I think one to the west, and you're at the first dungeon. And that's when I pick up the game and replay it now. I find that it still has all of that, the discovery and everything you expect from a Legend of Zelda game, but it's one of the snappier ones, right? Because there's constant
Yeah.
enemies on the screen, and you can kind of bop to that first dungeon and pass it relatively quickly. And I feel like it's one of those games where I'm always I'm checking things off the list and I'm ready to move on to that next thing. And before you know it, I've spent hours playing the game and I'm deep into it. It's just that kind of
Mm-hmm.
game that pulls you in, and it's also, we talked about the Dodongos before, and similar to the games that would come later in the series, but you also have some really intimidating enemies like wall masters, and who'll grab you
Oh
and
my
carry you
gosh.
back to the start of the dungeon. So I think the Pole's voice,
Lionel's.
yeah, that you
Wizroads.
yeah. So there's even the enemy encounters become a little bit of a puzzle to solve, right? Because you can't just walk up
Mm-hmm.
to everything and brute force it.
I still have a sense memory of where you get the white sword. There is this like blue Lionel, and you learn just the impact of color coding an enemy. Is it a red one or a blue one? And the blue ones were always way scarier because they would hurt you worse, and they would take more slashes with your sword to kill or whatever. And I still just have that memory of like, oh no, it's a blue one.
I know.
Like,
It makes you wonder about if anybody played The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time first and fell in love with the Zora there, and then
Yeah.
went back for the original The Legend of Zelda, and were not quite so pleased with their reception by the River Zora.
I know. Every Zora in every lake you pass by just has to take a shot at you for some reason. But and the other thing we haven't touched on yet, that another kind of revolutionary thing about The Legend of Zelda was, it had a battery backup. You could actually save your progress.
Mhm.
And at the time, outside of computers and floppy disks, that really wasn't a common thing. There'd started to be some games like Kid Icarus and Metroid where, you had a password save, which, was better than nothing for sure, but, it took some time to jot down the password. And here comes this game that's the adventures. The scope of it is so big, they're not even going to pretend you could finish this in one sitting. There had to be something special to make sure you saved your progress. And yeah, it's just so many new things with that game. And I will admit that when I go back and play it now, usually on Nintendo Switch Online with the NES collection there, I don't hesitate to use the spin points. So saving is even easier than it ever was. Multiple saves, basically. And then the rewind feature as well, because the action can get really challenging in those dungeons. You can't, again, you don't want to just kind of want to charge through things. Even if it's a room full of skeletons or little blobs, you kind of got to methodically make sure you're on top of your game, or you can very quickly slip up and have to go back to the start of the dungeon.
Yeah, back in our day, there weren't save states, and you had to walk 3 miles in the snow to save your game.
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't just hit that power button though. You got to hold the reset button down before you hit power.
Yeah.
That's right. All the little rules. Well, I think I got to continue playing through this game even more now. It's just brought back too many cool memories. But for now, we'll move on to Warp Zone. And this time, instead of doing the usual quiz questions in honor of the Legend of Zelda series, we're going to take a totally different kind of quiz. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on one important aspect of one very memorable game, which is the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And we talked about the Ocarina songs a little earlier, but how well do you think you remember those songs? We're going to see exactly how well you remember them, because I'm going to play 3 of my favorites, and we'll see if the 2 of you can work as a team to remember what any of them are, or maybe even what they're called or what they do. So are you guys ready to give it a shot?
We've got this.
Yes, nervous, but Audrey is here, so everything's going to be fine.
I'm terrible at this type of game, but great at Zelda, so let's see how that merges.
All right, so if you do know what it is right away, please wait till the song's over, just to give everyone who's listening a chance to guess. All right, here we go. The first one. All right, any guesses as to which song this is?
It's a Epona song.
Nice. Yep, and you know what?
Yep.
And of course, I'm sure you know what it does.
It calls Epona.
Right? Your trusty steed. All right, 1 for
That's
1.
right.
This might be too easy for you guys. You ready for the second one?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. All right, which Ocarina song is this?
Is it the Song of Storms?
It is.
It is
Right?
the Song of Storms. Well done.
So like I was trying to remember the actual name of the song, because I know that's the song that plays in the windmill in Kakariko Village, which is where I have like my memory of it, hearing it a lot.
That's also my
But then-
ringtone.
Oh, that's great.
But then, yeah, right? Then you eventually acquire it yourself.
This is one of those little video game jingles that just will randomly pop into my head like year after
Yep.
year. It just, I'll find myself whistling it. And of course, it's used to bring the rain. All right, and here is the third and final Ocarina song. All right, I'm betting one of you knows which song this is.
Song of Time.
Yep.
Nice. Yep, used to open the door of time and the temple of time to get the Master Sword. Pretty crucial tune that you have to learn there.
Beautiful
I find
songs.
it. Oh, go ahead.
That's all I had to add. Beautiful, beautiful songs.
They're beautiful. No, I find it interesting, Chris, that I was expecting like deep cuts from like the soundtrack, but you actually went with like all ocarina tunes, which is interesting. But they're definitely a super iconic part of that game. So
I was expecting Bolero of Fire, Requiem of Spirit, Nocturne of Shadow.
the deep cuts, Shadow Temple.
Yeah, I love how these tunes, well, all of them really kind of keep coming back in later games as well.
Yep.
You'll find them kind of mixed
Yep.
in new arrangements. So it's fun maybe if people haven't heard them in that kind of original pure form before, to go back to the beginning. Well, awesome. 3 for 3. Perfect job, you guys. And now we're going to move on to game forecast. So before we go, we're going to take a quick look at some of the Nintendo Switch games that recently released or are coming soon. So I'll read through the list here, and then we'll see what pops off to you guys. First of all, on November 16th, we had Hextech Mayhem, a League of Legends story from Riot Forge. We also had Ruin King, a League of Legends story from Airship Syndicate and Riot Forge. and Surviving the Aftermath from Ice Flake Studios and Paradox Interactive, and The Wild at Heart from Moonlight Kids and Humble Games. Then on November 19th, we had Nerf Legends from Fun Labs and Game Mill. And of course, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Pokemon Shining Pearl from Nintendo. On November 23rd, we had Death's Door from Acid Nerve and Devolver Digital. On November 25th, there was Deer Simulator, your average everyday deer game from Gibier Games and Playism. On December 3rd, we had Big Brain Academy Brain vs. Brain from Nintendo. And also Danganronpa Decadence from Spike Chunsoft. And this is a collection that include Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc Anniversary Edition, Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair Anniversary Edition, Danganronpa version 3 V3 Killing Harmony Anniversary Edition, and Danganronpa S Ultimate Summer Camp, all of which can also be purchased individually. And then also on December 3rd, we had Disney Magical World 2 Enchanted Edition from Bandai Namco Entertainment. And on December the 8th, we've got Sam & Max Beyond Time and Space from Suncape Games. And then finally, on December 9th, we have 2 titles, Super Impossible Road from Gunstone Studios, Wonderful Lasers and Rogue Games, and Loop Hero from 4 Quarters and Devolver Digital. Now, that's quite a lot there, and that's just a sample of the games that have been coming out here recently. But Ethan, we'll start with you. Is there anything here that you're especially looking forward to, or maybe even have taken a chance to play already?
There's actually a bunch on this list. I was kind of surprised that I want to check out, and maybe we'll try to do that, during the winter break. But I'm not somebody who's played League of Legends at all, but some things I've seen about the Ruined King have been kind of exciting to me. So I think I'm going to take a look at that. Deer Simulator. I think there's a number of E's in that. Is it Deer Simulator? Is that right? Yeah. That. Oh,
yep.
Go ahead.
Yep, Deer Simulator, your average everyday deer game.
Right. So that was something that was completely not on my radar, but then I saw some video of that online and thought this looked weird and incredible and want to check that out. Then on the Nintendo side, I know my family and I are going to be playing some Big Brain Academy together, given that you can set some different levels, based on the age of people you're playing with, so that you're kind of on an even playing field. And so my kids have never played a Big Brain Academy game before, but I think they're really going to enjoy it. So that's one we're going to break out. And then I've also never played Loop Hero, but I've heard tons of people talk about it. And I feel like this is kind of my opportunity now that it's coming to Nintendo Switch, that I can jump in and find out what all the buzz has been about.
Awesome. Solid picks. Audrey, how about you?
So lots of good stuff on that list, but I only have eyes for Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Pokemon Shining Pearl. I had it pre-ordered. I was ready to go as soon as it released. I've been a Pokemaniac since I first fell in love with Bulbasaur and that world in Pokemon Blue, and I haven't missed a core game since. So I love Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl. Those games, when they came out on Nintendo DS, were actually the first Pokemon games that I played with my husband. So it has kind of a special place in my heart, and I'm going to put a lot of time into those games.
That's awesome. Actually, Pokemon Diamond version on Nintendo DS was the first Pokemon game that I actually played all the way through. So I'm really excited to try the new version. I'm also really excited about Big Brain Academy, Brain vs. Brain. We played, my kids and I played Big Brain Academy Wii Degree against each other. And I love those types of, quick, competitive, kind of fun, almost like a party atmosphere when you're going up against your friends or your family. So I'm definitely going to be playing that a lot with them, the new version. So yeah, that's a lot of good stuff. And I think you really can't go wrong. It's nice to know there'll be a lot of good, fun things to check out during the winter break, like you said, Ethan.
Mm-hmm.
And that about wraps things up. So Ethan and Audrey, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I can't wait to talk to you again, probably even more about Legend of Zelda in the future.
Hopefully, yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Chris. Have a wonderful holiday break.
Thanks, you too.
Yeah, you guys too. This was awesome. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of Nintendo Power Podcast. If you have any comments or questions you'd like us to consider answering on the show, you can email us at nintendopowerpodcast@noa.nintendo.com. Also, we always appreciate appreciate it if you can leave a review, and be sure to subscribe so you get new episodes as soon as they're ready. Thanks for listening, and keep playing with power.